When Frank Sinatra walked into Elvis Presley's dressing room at NBC Studios on December 12, 1960, nobody expected what was about to happen next. What started as a casual pre-show meeting between two legends became the most spontaneous and hilarious musical showdown in television history. In the next 15 minutes, the chairman of the board would challenge the king of rock and roll to do something neither had ever attempted on live TV: completely swap musical styles in front of 40 million viewers. What followed was so unexpectedly entertaining that the footage became legendary, but for decades, the full story of what happened backstage remained hidden. But let me take you back to how these two musical giants ended up in the same room that December night. Because the chain of events that led to this iconic TV moment will show you that sometimes the greatest entertainment comes from legends challenging each other to step completely outside their comfort zones. It was the taping of Welcome Home Elvis, a special NBC variety show celebrating Elvis's return from his army service. The network had pulled out all the stops, booking major guests including Frank Sinatra as the surprise guest to welcome Elvis back. Frank Sinatra, at 45, was at the absolute peak of his Rat Pack era. Smooth, sophisticated, and the undisputed king of Las Vegas. He'd been privately critical of rock and roll, famously calling it the martial music of every sideburn delinquent. Elvis, now 25 and fresh out of the army, was nervous about his return to show business. 2 years away had made him wonder if his fans had moved on, if his style was still relevant. Backstage at NBC's Rockefeller Center studios, Elvis was in his dressing room with pianist Floyd Kramer when there was a sharp knock on the door. "Come in," Elvis called out. In walked Frank Sinatra, impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, cigarette dangling from his lips, carrying that famous confidence that made everyone pay attention. "Well, well," Sinatra said, his voice carrying that distinctive quality millions loved. "If it isn't the returning hero. How was Germany, kid?" Elvis stood up immediately, extending his hand. "Mr. Sinatra, it's an honor to meet you, sir. Germany was educational." Sinatra laughed. "Educational. I like that. Very diplomatic." He looked Elvis up and down, taking in the perfectly styled hair, the flashy gold jacket. "You know, Elvis," Sinatra continued, settling into a chair without being invited, "I've been listening to your music while you were away, trying to understand what all the fuss is about." Floyd Kramer quietly excused himself, sensing this conversation was about to get interesting. "And?" Elvis asked, genuinely curious about Sinatra's opinion. "And I have to admit, you've got something. Raw talent, definite stage presence. But here's what I don't understand. All that hip shaking and shouting. Where's the sophistication? Where's the class?" Elvis felt his face flush slightly. This was Frank Sinatra, one of his musical heroes, basically telling him his style lacked class. "And?" Elvis asked, genuinely curious about Sinatra's opinion. "And I have to admit, you've got something. Raw talent, definite stage presence. But here's what I don't understand. All that hip shaking and shouting. Where's the sophistication? Where's the class?" Elvis felt his face flush slightly. This was Frank Sinatra, one of his musical heroes, basically telling him his style lacked class. "Now don't get your feathers ruffled, kid," Sinatra said. "I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's different, very different from real singing." "Real singing?" Elvis asked, his voice carrying just a hint of edge. "Yeah, real singing, like this." Sinatra stood up and began crooning "The Way You Look Tonight" in his signature style. Smooth, controlled, every word perfectly enunciated. "That," Sinatra said when he finished, "is how you make love to a song. You don't attack it like you're trying to wrestle it to the ground." "Mr. Sinatra," Elvis said finally, "I respect what you do, but my music comes from a different place. It's not about making love to a song. It's about letting the song make love to the audience through you." Sinatra raised an eyebrow. "Show me." Elvis launched into Heartbreak Hotel, but slowed down, more emotional, letting his voice crack and soar. He wasn't performing, he was demonstrating. When Elvis finished, Sinatra was quiet for a long moment. "Huh," Sinatra said finally. "That's actually not bad, kid, but I still think you could use some class." "And I think you could use some soul, Mr. Sinatra," Elvis replied. The two men stared at each other, sizing each other up. That's when a production assistant knocked. "Mr. Presley, Mr. Sinatra, you're needed for the pre-show meeting." As they walked toward the stage, Sinatra suddenly stopped. "Elvis, I've got an idea. What if we do something completely different tonight?" "What do you mean?" "What if we prove both our points? You try to sing one of my songs my way, and I try to sing one of your songs your way? Right there on live television?" Elvis stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious, unless you're chicken." "I'm not chicken, Mr. Sinatra, but are you sure you want to try to rock and roll?" Sinatra grinned. "Kid, I've been messing up perfect hair since before you were born." They quickly explained their idea to the producer, who realized this spontaneous challenge was television gold. Minutes later, they were on stage in front of a studio audience and 40 million television viewers. Ed Sullivan made the announcement with barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley have decided to challenge each other to a musical style swap. Frank is going to attempt to sing rock and roll, and Elvis is going to try his hand at a classic standard." The audience erupted. "Frank, you're going first. What Elvis song are you attempting?" Sinatra straightened his bow tie. "Ed, I'm going to take on Hound Dog, and I'm going to try to do it the way Elvis does it." The band launched into Hound Dog, and Frank Sinatra attempted to rock and roll. What followed was both hilarious and oddly impressive. Sinatra tried to incorporate Elvis's hip movements, but his tuxedo and natural sophistication made every gesture look like formal dance moves. The audience was loving it, not laughing at him, but with him. "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," Sinatra sang, but in his distinctive crooning style, making it sound almost like jazz. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. When he finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation. "All right, Elvis," Sullivan said when the applause died down. "Now it's your turn. What Sinatra standard are you going to tackle?" Elvis had been thinking about this during Frank's performance. "Ed, I'm going to try my way, and I'm going to do it the Sinatra way. Smooth, sophisticated, classy." Sinatra nodded approvingly from the side of the stage. "Good choice, kid. But remember, it's not just about the notes, it's about the attitude." The orchestra began the elegant opening of My Way, and Elvis did something remarkable. He completely changed his entire physical presence. Gone was the energetic, hip-swiveling performer. Instead, he stood almost perfectly still, one hand casually in his pocket, the other holding the microphone like it was a cocktail glass. And he sang it beautifully. Elvis took Sinatra's sophisticated approach and added just enough of his own soulfulness to make it his own without losing the essential elegance of the song. His voice, naturally powerful and emotional, brought new depth to the familiar lyrics. But here's where it got interesting. About halfway through the song, Elvis caught Sinatra's eye and winked. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he added just a tiny bit of his trademark style. A small hip movement, a slight vocal flourish that was pure Elvis. The audience noticed immediately and started laughing and applauding. Sinatra started laughing too, recognizing that Elvis was finding a way to be both respectful and authentic. Everything was going perfectly until Elvis reached the climactic final verse. Getting caught up in the moment and the audience's enthusiasm, he decided to attempt one of Sinatra's signature moves, the casual cigarette and cocktail lean against the piano. The problem was that Elvis wasn't used to performing while leaning casually. His natural style was all about movement and energy. When he tried to lean against the piano while hitting the big note in "I Did It My Way," he misjudged the distance. Elvis leaned too far, lost his balance, and ended up sprawled across the piano bench with his legs sticking up in the air, still trying to finish the song. The audience gasped, then exploded in laughter when they realized he wasn't hurt. Even the orchestra stopped playing because they were laughing too hard to continue. Sinatra rushed over to help Elvis up, both of them cracking up. "Well," Elvis said, straightening his gold jacket and grinning, I guess I need a few more lessons in sophistication. And I need a few more lessons in not throwing my back out trying to rock and roll, Sinatra replied. Ed Sullivan, recognizing television magic when he saw it, decided to let the moment play out naturally. Gentlemen, Sullivan said, I think we've learned something here tonight. Frank, what did you learn trying to sing like Elvis? Sinatra thought for a moment. Ed, I learned that what Elvis does isn't easy. It takes incredible energy, incredible connection with the audience. There's real skill in making people feel like you're singing directly to them, like you're sharing something personal and important. He turned to Elvis. Kid, I may not understand all the hip shaking, but I understand the heart behind it now. You're not just entertaining people, you're giving them permission to feel things. The audience applauded warmly at this unexpected moment of mutual respect. Elvis, Sullivan continued, what about you? What did you learn trying to sing like Frank? Elvis nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Sullivan, I learned that there's incredible power and restraint in making every word count, in trusting that your voice and your presence are enough without all the movement. Mr. Sinatra makes it look easy, but that kind of control and sophistication, that's real mastery. He looked at Sinatra. And I learned that we're both trying to do the same thing, connect with people through music. We just do it in different ways. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sinatra and Elvis. They looked at each other, and without any prompting from Sullivan or the producers, they both walked to the center of the stage. You know what, kid? Sinatra said. How about we do one together? Your way, my way, our way. What song? Elvis asked. How about Love Me Tender? It's got enough soul for you and enough class for me. The orchestra, getting the cue, began the gentle opening of Love Me Tender, and what followed was magical. Sinatra and Elvis sang together, each maintaining their own style, but blending them in a way that was greater than the sum of its parts. Sinatra's smooth sophistication provided the foundation, while Elvis's emotional power soared above it. They weren't trying to outdo each other anymore. They were collaborating, creating something neither could have achieved alone. When the song ended, the studio audience gave them a 5-minute standing ovation. Even the orchestra members were standing and applauding. After the show, Elvis and Sinatra ended up back in Elvis's dressing room, both still energized by what had happened. Frank, Elvis said, that was incredible. I've never experienced anything like that. Neither have I, kid. We should do it again sometime. Sinatra pulled out a cigarette and lit it. The atmosphere was completely different now. What had started as mild antagonism had become genuine mutual respect. You know, Elvis, I owe you an apology. I said some things about rock and roll that weren't fair. I was judging something I didn't understand. Elvis shook his head. No apology needed, Mr. Sinatra. You were honest, and that pushed me to be better. That's what real friends do. Friends? Sinatra smiled. I like the sound of that. Before Sinatra left that night, they made plans to work together again. What had started as a spontaneous challenge had become the beginning of a lasting friendship. The Style Swap Challenge became one of the most replayed television moments of the 1960s. It showed millions of viewers that musical legends were human, could laugh at themselves, and that different musical styles could coexist and enhance each other. For Elvis, the experience taught him to appreciate traditional pop craftsmanship. He began incorporating more sophisticated arrangements into his later work. For Sinatra, it opened his eyes to genuine artistry in rock and roll. He became more supportive of younger musicians and even recorded some rock-influenced songs. Their friendship led to several more collaborations over the years, including a legendary private recording session that remains unreleased. Have you ever had a moment where a challenge or competition with someone turned into an unexpected friendship? Where trying to prove yourself led to finding common ground with someone you thought was completely different? Tell us about it in the comments. Let's celebrate the moments when rivalry becomes respect. If this story reminded you that the best collaborations often come from the most unexpected places, make sure you're subscribed for more incredible stories about musical legends learning from each other. Hit that notification bell for stories about the moments when competition becomes cooperation. The most important thing that happened that night wasn't the laughs or the applause. It was two musical legends discovering that they had more in common than they had differences. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley proved that great artists can challenge each other, learn from each other, and ultimately make each other better. Sometimes the best performances aren't about being perfect. They're about being willing to step outside your comfort zone, to risk looking foolish, and to discover that the person you thought was your opposite might actually be your equal. That night, two kings of different musical realms found out that there's room for everyone at the top, as long as you're willing to share the stage and learn something new.